Okay, so welcome. A few disclaimers about this. I said 6 weeks, but it may not be consecutive. The reason why is because we've got a
This is one that's got,
coming up.
I was going to go do this one, but I noticed it's got all the answers in it.
Come as you want, come as you're able. So,
Is
I mean, I'm
the
happy
computer
to
that I can
keep your
go on to
Memorial Day,
printers.
so unless you're gone, I don't know what your travel plans are, but there's a couple of different things in there. So roughly 6 weeks. Actually, there's Jen. Jen's gonna be doing a.
Hi.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I was just about to say your Together Transition test is coming up in 2 weeks.
In 2 weeks, yeah.
So we'll probably pause for that so that we can listen to your important updates.
That's right. That's right. Awesome.
We heard this morning about Christ, John 15, where Jesus says, "I am the vine, you are the branches. Apart from me, you can do nothing." Share with you a different image of the fig tree in the vineyard, which is from Luke 13. And I'm going to have to use my cheaters just at that point. A man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard, and he came looking for fruit on it, and he found none. So he said to the gardener, "See here, for 3 years I've been looking for fruit on this fig tree, and still I find none. Cut it down. Why should it be wasting the soil?" He replied, "Sir, let it alone for 1 more year until I dig around it and put manure on it. If it bears fruit next year, well and good, but if not, you can cut it down." Jesus told this story as a response to questions about misfortune, punishment, and sin. Most people interpreted the parable this way: the man is God. We are the fig tree. God is not pleased that we do not bear fruits and threatens to destroy us. The gardener is Jesus, who pleads on our behalf and buys us some more time, a grace period, until we get our act together. And this is the author of our book, Eric Law, I subscribed to this interpretation until I studied this text with a group of Chinese refugees from Southeast Asia. After listening to the story, one of the participants asked, "What's a fig tree doing in a vineyard?" This question opened my eyes to a new dimension of the story I had never thought before. What kind of fruit is this man looking for? He continued his inquiry. If he's looking for grapes, he's not going to find any. Besides, the Chinese name for fig is no flower fruit. So a fig tree bears fruit differently from the grapevine. As we explored further on this theme, another participant said, "Back in Vietnam, I was a doctor. Now I wash dishes in a restaurant. People in America don't see the fruit we bear." We often think of a grace period as a little bit more time to do what we have to get done. In 2013, we witnessed the U.S. Congress procrastinating during a grace period over the so-called fiscal cliff and sequester cuts. Instead of using the grace period to understand the issues in a new way and see them from different perspectives, our nation leaders simply reinforced their static beliefs during this time. In other words, they were saying the same old thing: we want fruit as we define it. They used the grace period as time for additional political maneuvering designed to gain the upper hand. Perhaps it's time to see the fig tree for what it is and not expect it to grow and bear fruit like grapevines. Perhaps we need to use the grace period to listen to those who are impacted in local communities, like the fig trees in the parable, and appreciate the gifts and talents that they bring to the nation. In the Exodus story, God had observed the mystery of my people who are in Egypt and heard their cry. God, with the help of Moses, solved the slavery problem with an innovative solution: liberate the captives. When we're able to see an issue from the perspective of those who suffer, we may discover innovative solutions to our problems. I just wanted to share that with you in light of our gospel story. And this is from Eric Law. I bought the author of the book that we have. He wrote an extra book on just some other thoughts. So really, I think we are living in an age of innovation, right? If you were to describe where we're at, the past 50 years, there's been more change than the previous 300 years, right? I mean, things have just shifted so fast, and we are living in a culture of whitewater change. It's difficult to keep up. You learn a new program, a new software, and 2 weeks later, there's something else. So really, I think one of the things that to be a missional congregation, and we'll come back to that word missional later, so don't, I'm gonna throw it out there and I'll define it later, but you have to be innovative. You know, you have to be innovative, you have to redefine yourself, it's not easy, and those things. So in light of this text, we need to think about stewardship in different uses as well. Right? And that's what I liked about this book. That's why I chose it during our Lenten series, is we're kind of trying to create a culture of generosity and thinking about giving from a lot of different angles. Everybody have the book. You turn to his, let's see, the cycle of blessing. There it is. It's after page 4. It's right before chapter 1 at the end of it. So this is his figure that he's using to help explain what he's trying to get at in the book. So in the center is what he would call, like, anybody been to Niagara Falls? Yeah. To see the water that continuously cascades and flows and the power that it generates. And he likens that cycle of blessing to like the Niagara Falls, right? Where there's just this power, and when things get moving in that cycle, it creates energy in that cycle of blessing. And so of those, there are 6 that he lays out that are kind of this fall under what broadly we would call stewardship. And every congregation, kind of the underlying energy behind a congregation is found within those 6, right? So you've got the currency of relationship, currency of truth, currency of wellness, currency of money, currency of time and place, and currency of leadership. And then the pyramid on the bottom is what he calls a sustainable missional ministry. Sustainable missional ministry. So let me pause there. Everybody see that? Any thoughts on that?
Just thought it was interesting. He said that his mother had taught him that from the time he was young, and that they had used it, they used it as a model for their music ministry. Yeah. So,
yeah.
I've never seen it before, and he grew up with it.
Yeah, it's a good observation there. So I think he begins chapter 1 with pretty basic. Praise God from whom all blessings flow. That's the doxology that he prays. You sung that? Have we seen that? Praise God.
We have.
Yeah.
Because they have a lot of 8:30 people in here.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's good.
Some vocalists.
I'm not a musician, as you probably have figured out. So I can do doxology, I can sing it. And over the years, taught myself how to sing music and things. So, but that's not a gift that comes natural to me. Yeah.
The doxology, that's just about this much of the doxology. I've looked it up, the doxology is.
Wow.
There's part of it. Page 10, he brings up from money to blessing. And this kind of gets at what we were just talking about with his upbringing. When I teach stewardship with confirmation kids, I do a money biography. I don't know if you've ever done that. But he's kind of doing a money biography here on page 10. He says, recall an earlier time in your life when money was flowing in a way that gives blessings. It could be a story or experience in which your parents, relatives, friends, or elders had used money in a way that built relationships, told truth, fostered wellness, or built up the community. Where were you? Who was there? What were you doing? Where did the money involved come from? What lessons did the money exchange for? Who or what group was enriched? What long-term benefits did this create? How did this experience impact the way you use money today, personally or for your ministry? So money is one of those weird things that most of us learn the value of money from our family of origin, right? So typically how mama used money, you learn that, right? Or how daddy used money, or how grandma used money and so forth. So that is something that we learned early on by observing our families. Most of us. Does that make sense? Anybody that had a different experience? So I just remember my grandfather and in my life, basically to get money you work is what I was taught, right? You want money, you gotta work for it. That's kind of how I live my life. You want money, you work for it. So my first experience with money, as I remember, was in junior high school, and this is back in the day of Nintendos. The old Nintendos. And I really wanted one, but I didn't have the $100 to get one. So I could either ask for it for Christmas or I could work for it. And so when I put down the pen to paper, I thought, man, this is going to take too long. Because I was earning a couple of bucks a day, it's going to take a long time or whatever. So my buddy and I were walking home from school one day in junior high, and he tells me that the guy who owns the gas station in the corner, which was a strip lot, was going to pay him $20 a week to pick up trash, and that he wanted help. And so I got the invitation to pick trash up at the gas station in Pflugerville, Texas, $20 a week. 5 weeks I could get that Nintendo. And I did it, right? I finally got it, and then I discovered just because you have the Nintendo does not mean that you gotta buy the games too, right? That's the other. So that didn't even enter into my thinking. But that's my first experience I can remember with money. Anybody else? What was your first experience?
Mine was, of course, I'm old enough, I could be your mom.
Oh, I don't know about that.
Oh, yes. But my dad and my mom stayed home. My dad had fought in the war during World War II. They had come through the Depression. They were all about, again, you said, you work for what you want. And my father drove a truck locally. We were always poor. And so, but I can remember, and I was 15. And back then we had Cat's drug stores. Kathy grew up in the same area I did, North County.
Really old.
So I worked at Cat's drug store down at the Circle Cats, part-time. It was a pharmacy. And they put me down in, everybody wanted a fish. And it was a goldfish cage, and there were like 300 fish in this aquarium. But anyway, so I wanted a villager purse that was $100.
Okay.
Well, there was no way. My mom thought I was absolutely crazy. And I also babysat. Started babysitting when I was 11, and I had a babysitting job every weekend. So I saved up, and then finally when I got the $100, it was like, this was a leather purse. You had to see it. It's beautiful. And those of you remember, and it had your 3 initials, non-print on it. And most of the girls at school had one. Well, I finally, when I earned after a couple of months that $100, I thought, oh my gosh. So I went to Baker's shoe store and bought a knockoff for $30. And it was like, you had to work. There were no extras. There were no vacations. That's just how it was. And, it was a great generation and great lessons.
Go ahead. I grew up on a farm and
Where was your farm?
in Iowa.
Which side? Or what county?
Carroll County.
Oh, okay. So
My
the
side.
North Central- Yeah, the North Central. Yeah, actually, Carroll's further west. Yeah,
And halfway between Des Moines and Omaha.
right, yeah, that is west.
What I learned about money was no matter how hard you work, and how much you prepared, all the stuff in a hailstorm, and then some years you didn't make all that done.
So where did you learn that? Did you learn that from your parents
My
or?
parents.
Okay. So it sounds like they probably had an experience where there was a loss
Oh, yeah,
and a catastrophe, so you had to have your ducks in a row in order.
oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You be careful with money. You do, there's no guarantees.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially like the coming out of the Great Depression, right? That really influenced, I think, a lot of my grandparents, maybe some of your parents. And so I know, that really, even to this day, my grandmother still hoards everything, because nothing went to waste. Yeah.
Also, I learned from my grandparents, they went through the depression, and they didn't believe in banks for years.
Yeah.
Mhm.
My grandfather never had a credit card. Never had a
My
credit card.
grandmother used to keep money.
I mean,
She would cash her.
Yeah.
how do you go through like
It's like,
Yeah.
You never had a credit card.
We attached work to getting new clothes for school in the fall, because it was beans and pickles, or cucumbers that we picked. The cucumbers went one way, ended up in Green Bay as elastic pickles, and the beans, you had gunny sacks full of them. They went to the canning factory, and all the money we made went to our clothes for school in the fall.
Mhm.
And I'm sure there were times when we didn't make enough to pay for their clothes. that
Yeah.
My parents paid for it, so.
Well, I worked with a bunch of girls and they were just having their families. And money was no option for them. If they wanted stuff, they had cleaning ladies and they went out to eat. And every time I'd be conservative in our group with saving this or doing that, they said, oh, you were just a depression baby. So, money and mine are different.
I was the youngest child, and so I always got my sister's hand-me-down clothes. She was 6 years older than me. So 6 years ago, they might have looked really cute. So if I wanted like some new chick jeans, that was the thing. When I was growing up, I wanted chick jeans. My mom told me, you can have those, but you have to pay half of them. Well, half of them for chick jeans when you're in 6th grade is a lot of money. So, it took a long time to save those. So,
Yeah.
my mom never, they always had plenty of clothes.
Yeah.
My sister.
Poodle skirts were popular when I was growing up. And my mom
Yeah.
made my poodle skirts.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
On the top of page 10, just above that, he said something that really struck me. He says in that first full paragraph, for those that have the book, and I'll just read it here. So we have a choice in what we do with our resources, over which we have control. We can choose to hold on to them and let them turn rotten, or use them to further divisive and destructive causes, or we can choose to let them flow in life-giving, truth-telling, relationship-building, community-enhancing ways. And then he goes on to quote Deuteronomy chapter 30:19. I have called heaven and earth to witness against you today, because I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Choose life so that you and your descendants may live. Anybody have refrigerators, right? Or you have a refrigerator. You have leftovers. If you have a leftover in your refrigerator right now, so Nancy, you don't like leftovers?
No, we do, we've already eaten them.
I'm gonna have to cook. We know what she's doing today.
That's amazing. I mean, think about it. Leftovers are an indication of abundance, right? We have an abundance of food. Go to Africa and visit some of these rural villages. They don't have leftovers. You want to eat, you eat, you go catch your fish, you eat it, you fry it, there ain't no leftovers. You don't even have electricity. How can you have leftovers? So that is a sign of abundance, right? That we don't even see because we just grew up with it and we have it and it's in abundance. But, I always think about those leftovers because I'm not always good at eating leftovers, to be honest with you. But they're there, right? And I've got kids and so there's always leftovers. But To me, that is a reminder of the abundance. I have a bed to sleep in, I have a roof over my head, and I got some food in the refrigerator. So I've been blessed, right? It's those little bitty things that when you pay attention to, you realize the blessings that we have. We don't have everything, but we have some blessings. And so I think that that's what he's trying to get at, kind of with this thing. How we choose to use resources matters, right? We can use it to build up community, or we can use it to further divide community and things of that nature. So I think it was just an invitation to consider how I'm using the resources that God has entrusted to me, because he starts at the beginning of the book saying everything belongs to God, which is the first principle of biblical stewardship. Everything, we see here is from our Creator. It's from Earth. Nothing here came from outer space, as far as I know. But it's all made from the earth, right? Everything we have. So it all came and began with our Creator. And then he goes on the bottom of the page to redefine or define for us the word currency, which we're familiar with, but really it's just a word that means flowing. We typically use it, currency, as in like money, dollar bills and coins and things of that nature, pretty much how we define it. But it comes from a Latin word which literally means to run or to flow. So that there's a currency flowing between us, right? And most of us are familiar with that currency. You buy something from me, you give me money. Or if I get a service from you, you're gonna want money. And so that's the currency that flows between us. That's all that word means. But he's trying to broaden this and saying for churches and faith communities, it's not just money, right, that flows between us. There are a lot of things that work and at play between us and this faith community. He goes on and they're on that wheel. It's the time and place, the leadership, the relationships, the truth, and the wellness. And then he defines what he means on those, which I kind of covered during the season of Lent. So any reflection or questions on that? Making sense?
That's fine.
What's that?
Making sense.
That's good. I didn't catch that one. All right, we're going to fast forward to page 16.
I guess I would just say that it's that term, it's important, the flowing, because it heightens all of those gifts, flowing of the time. The flow, if you think of that word in place of currency, because I get stuck, currency just means money. So to put the word flowing, that even gives, activeness to those blessings, and that's our hope and challenge.
Yeah.
On the other side of it, I think it's just talking about with it being, with us using water in lieu of currency. And then he explains about water being still or stagnant and how nothing good comes from that. And, we don't usually think about that. I'm still thinking about, for instance, your stewardship sermon the first Sunday you were here. And that's about God using it and so on. I went to Barry immediately after the worship and asked if there was some kind of return policy on his call, but
Oh, no, that's a done deal.
But you just don't often give it that much thought to the things that you're doing with it, because it becomes automatic and it does flow out for everybody more than it seems to flow in. But you put it in a setting like we're speaking of, and relative then to mission, it's very important to be deliberate about what we're doing.
Yeah. And the 90-day guarantee is expired. So Barry knows how much work was involved in that. We're in the call process now, so it's still working well. Okay, at the bottom, I was struck by this on page 16, before the darkened box. He says, in order to practice this spirituality, talking about life and death here, people in our communities must believe in the abundance that comes from giving. If everybody in our community gives until he or she has less, it will generate a dynamic that will keep everyone giving and receiving. Eventually, what we give away will actually return to us in new forms with new gifts. Once we realize that giving is not a one-time losing game, but part of a dynamic process that keeps resources flowing in our community, we will have the courage to give generously. I thought that was profound so my family, I think, was pretty generous. I mean, my mother is, and I think I'm pretty generous as well. But I learned that from my mom, right? My mom worked hard to get to, she's retired now, but she really worked hard. And, she gave a lot, not just money, but to myself, my family, whatever. But, and I picked up on it. And so I give too. But I think what happens, and maybe this is a generational thing, there is a loss associated with giving, right? If I give something, that means I lose it. That's just kind of going, because we have attached all these emotions and things, particularly with money. When I give it away, it's gone. I lost it, right? But what he's saying, and this is why I love, he's reframing my thinking. He's saying it's not a loss, right? It's just going into a different form. So I talked about that sermon. One of the funnest things to do is give something and watch how God's going to use it. Like just step back and give it, right? And then step back and see what God does. That's the way I approach my giving now. So at least that's what I'm thinking about. And when I give, I just, like for me, it's not my money. It's ours, right? Because it's, and it's up for the community to discern how to, and that's what it means to be missional. Right? We have to discern what God is asking us to do, right? That's what it means to be a missional community. What is God up to, and how can we participate with what God is doing? That's the $1 million question. So, does that make sense? That's what makes a missional community versus a non-missional. So, yeah, sure.
There's that Bible passage that says, cast your bread upon the waters and it will return tenfold. I've seen that in action. I've given and I end up getting more back. And to me, it's fabulous to watch that happen.
Yeah.
Even in little things, I gave my neighbors extra cucumbers, and when their peaches came in, they gave me peaches. I liked it. So, I mean, that was a little bit, but it happens in money and other things too.
Yeah.
It happens with your time. You give time for something, and you generally get so much back.
Right.
And blessings or whatever.
Yeah. So I think the Bible knows this, and I think we know this to be true. You have to be taught how to give, right? You look at babies from the start of life, right? They need something, like it's in our nature to hoard stuff, right? I'm going to need it. And so people have to be taught how to give. I think that's one of the beauties of a faith community. We can teach each other what it means to be generous. So, yeah, Susan.
When you were talking about, taught to give, and then we were talking previously about learning the value of money. I grew up on a small farm, and it was not a wealthy area. There were a few people, obviously, that had lots of money. Purdue's, like Purdue chicken, that's the area. But other people were not wealthy. They were. Anyhow, my mother was a great philanthropist. We never had a lot of money, but she was, I think, a remarkable woman and a great philanthropist. So when I was young, I'm the youngest of 5, she would drive to all these farms all around the area, and she would collect money for March and Dimes. And she said she did it because she was from Washington, D.C., and she saw how great President Franklin Roosevelt was. And she had 5 healthy children, all that could walk. And so she did that very, very fervently. And a lot of the farmers would turn her down. I mean, you walk up to a doorway and, no, I can't do that. I just don't have any money. She said, she said these little crutches had a dime on it. She said, but I want $1 for every farmer. She got it. Fast forward, okay? This is trying very little. Fast forward. They did immunizations at the local hospital, and then a few years later, they did the sugar cubes with the drops in the sugar cubes to get your immunizations for polio. And I was a little girl in elementary school by that time, and I had that. Fast forward from there. A few years ago, we were living in Wichita. There was a March of Dimes walk, and I thought, my mother passed away. She just passed away that year. I thought, I'm going to walk for my mother. And like you said, those beautiful seeds of philanthropy start from when the children are little. And so if you can encourage a small child to see you doing that, and I encourage my children to give when we had the flood in 1993. They were little, but we were able to take them to the Red Cross, and while we fed people during the flood of 1993, they played with the other children. So you can do this in so many ways, and you plant those seeds, and then those seeds multiply over time. And so even though she didn't have a lot of money, she had time, and she instilled that in 5 children, and those 5 children have instilled that in their children and their grandchildren. So it can, this missional type of giving actually comes back, like you said, Sherry, tenfold. This is coming back tenfold, because you might give a small amount of whatever you have. It doesn't have to be money. It could be money and time and whatever. It comes back to you tenfold. It really does. And to see this happening in people around you that you care for, it's really remarkable.
So I mentioned Africa. In Houston, we had a mission church that we were connected to. You know, in the ELCA, every synod is yoked with a different mission across the world. And one of them was in Africa, and I went. I was one of the few people that actually got into the country of Central African Republic. It was described as the third world of the third world. I mean, it's probably 152 countries. It's probably about 148, the poorest of the poor. But then I went to Lima, Peru, where we also had a relationship with the Lutheran church down there. And I remember getting on a plane because I flew in. I had to do a funeral. And so I flew down to Mexico City. And from Houston, I got on a plane. And I had the middle seat, which I hate, right? And inevitably, if you talk to somebody on a plane, and you're telling them you're a pastor, they're either, you won't hear from them the entire flight, or they'll chat your ear off. So I sat down and I got in, and of course I'm sitting there like, who's going to sit next to me? And these 2 young 20-something guys come in and they sit down on either side of me. And I could smell they've been drinking. I'm like, okay, these guys are going to have a good time, whatever. I'm not sure what their motivation is or what. They're going south. And so I'm sitting there, and the 2 guys are on both sides, and they ordered cocktails and had them coming and everything. Like, yeah, we're going down to Panama City. We're going to go look for babes. Okay. And they're like, yeah, what are you up to? I'm like, well, said I'm a Lutheran pastor in Houston, and we've got this relationship with congregations, kids, we go down, we minister to them, and do this and that. And and then I get up at the end of the flight, getting everything, and the guy stands up, whips out a wad of money, says, Pastor, hands me $100, says, give this to the kids. Aww. Giving, right? Something had taught him. I don't know what it was. I don't know if this guilt into giving. But it it was just one of those random things that, the blessing, I had no idea that would be the case.
And you lied and said
I think too, like the big chunks are what we think about, but I think too, like the little bits of giving are the important pieces that, like Cindy was saying, just the giving of a small seed and watching it grow. So who knows what seeds we're sowing in the 2 or 3 generations from us when we're not here. I mean, what seeds we have sown right now, how that will be, I don't know. That's an interesting thing. It can be scary to think about. I don't know. Okay, currency of relationships. This is on page 18, and this is the 3rd chapter we're going to get to today. He's talking about there's a relationship within the congregation that people within the faith community have with each other. And then there's the outer relationship that the congregation has with the community, right? So that's what he kind of means by relationships, the currency of relationships. So yeah, let's just take here, listen to each other. What is our currency of relationships like at Living Word? How do you experience relationships? I would assume most of us think very positively of the relationships that we have here within the congregation. Anybody take part? And I don't want to pick up church. It could be at work, anything where relationships, that currency of relationships, because this is true for a lot of organizations. Every organization has some sort of currency of relationship through it. But how do you know when that currency is not really flowing? Now, I'm not talking about church. I'm talking about in your job, whatever. Have you ever experienced a situation in an organization where the currency of relationships were not flowing well? What did you see? What did you feel that you knew this currency of relationship was not flowing?
Nobody listened to each other.
Okay. So everybody's off doing their thing.
Both in the secular world and in our church relationships, I've experienced that the relationships are not such that people feel comfortable being straightforward and going to the person that they have a concern about or that they want to disagree with, and not necessarily argumentatively, but to share a different point of view. So instead, what's referred to is settling it on a parking lot. And my first experience with a council, the church council, was such that spent an hour and a half or so in a council meeting. Other than the president of the congregation and the pastor, there was little said by members of the council. I was running it, and then everybody gathered on the parking lot. And there was a lot said. It was obviously unhealthy.
Yeah. So I'm hearing there was a lack of trust, right? That we couldn't have this healthy dialogue, so there had to be a side conversation, So it was the lack of trust was kind of, if we think about that lack of trust was a dam holding back that currency where the relationships weren't flowing the way they should. That's how I heard you describe that situation. Okay. And what then was the result of that lack of flow of currency? Was there a consequence?
There was no ownership in the decisions that were being made by that particular council. It had to change over a period of years to be one where I guess trust was established. And so what I'm saying is that early on, what was happening was not only were things being discussed away from the council at large, but then when decisions were made by council, and this lack of ownership meant that there were members of council that they weren't owning it with other members of the congregation, but instead saying, well, that's what they decided. So, yeah, I mean, it was just one unhealthy thing after another, but it did, I mean, I was there long enough that I experienced the thing that happened. So.
Usually what will happen in a situation like that is communication goes lacking initially. And that's a huge lack of, a huge dam in that currency relationship. You have to be able to communicate, right? And so when you're not meeting like formally, this communication piece goes out the window, and what happens is there goes your trust, right? It takes a lot to build up trust, but then you drop one thing or do one bad, you know what I'm saying, and then it's gone, right? Yeah.
My experience has been with a few times, different jobs, different churches, communication almost disappears when things are going bad. There is no real communication. There's
That's
just,
a good observation.
it's just, people say what they have to say or whatever.
Right, okay. So there's an inward focus, right?
Right.
Which goes against what it means to be a missional community, you know. He talks about the missional community is not inward, it's outward focused, right? And so when you're navel gazing, when you're staring at yourself, you know, it's a vertex kind of circling the rim there. Oh, no, you know, so it's tough. But like you said, it took, Skip said it takes years to break that cycle, right? It took some leadership to filter in. Some organizations can go through, but that goes into the currency of leadership, which is a different kind of currency. But this is the relationship. See, they all flow together. When they flow together, that's what creates that cycle of blessing, and that's what we're trying to get at. Like, you get, and no congregation is good at all of them, right? I mean, every congregation has to develop these and work through them. And some congregations are great, great at relationships, and some congregations are great at other currencies, but no congregation is excellent at all of them, right? It takes a lot of work and trust. So, anybody else have any stories about how, it doesn't, but we're picking on the church. I know you guys worked, and I know that there's stories about work, right? Yeah.
Yeah. I just retired in November.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I was a registered nurse for the past 4 years. And my last 7 years, I had become case manager in the Medicare world for United Healthcare, Florida. And in my department, there were 52 of us, and we were all over the United States, we worked from home. And we had always had, you know, that flow of, you have a weekly meeting with your director and a monthly meeting with the regional manager. So there was always a flow of communication because, again, ever-changing computer systems, ever-changing how we would review the clinical information and pass it on to D&D. Well, all of a sudden, we had a meeting and they said, we're going to start slowly. We're going global, is how they explained it. Well, that meant our department, which there was overall 150, as well as the IT department, was going to be phased out. And they hired, went down to the Philippines. In fact, one of the nurses I trained went down there and trained those nurses. Nothing against them. I mean, they felt so blessed to have a company come in. But so they started phasing us out and all the communication stopped. So nurses, the younger nurses especially, would leave and go find jobs elsewhere. And they just totally phased us out. And it was so sad because, you know, there was great communication, great trust. And then when that communication stops, that flow stops,
yeah.
It's a bad feeling because you know something's not right, something's not happening, no one's communicating. And it did, it totally phased out. There were 12 of us left. and they phased us to another department, but it was the department where they needed nurses because nobody would go there. And so I did that for about 8 weeks, and I thought, you know what, this is not me, this is not your thing anymore. And I'm old enough now, I just need to retire. So, but it was that whole, and you can just see the whole flow, just broke down.
Yeah.
Which was really devastating.
That currency of communication.
Yes.
That communication is a tool of the currency of relationships, right? And when it's dammed up and you're not getting communication, trust goes out the window, right? And then like, what's going on? I'm not trusting, something's happening, but on the other side, there's a business decision to be made, but also, the whole thing, trust.
Now, corporations have agendas.
Yes.
Right.
Churches typically have visions and missions.
Right.
Okay, and when a corporation wants to change by choice, they communicate only what they want to communicate. I was lucky to have an experience in corporation to go sit back with our president and all the senior managers. You would go back for a week and have the president's prank calls at me. So you go and report in the meeting. And what I observed in that corporation was absolute trust in the boardroom. With these executives, they yell at each other and everybody got their point of view, but when they left the door, they made one decision and that was it. It never changed.
Gotta be down there.
Oh, that's their decision. It was talking about, it was.
Oh, the radio, yeah.
It went forward, yeah. So, which made communication a lot more.
Yeah, this is about over and I'm sorry.
He also talks a lot about truth telling in this currency relationship, which is challenging.
Thank you.